do I practice step 6 and 7 anymore? You know, do I? And of course I do, but it's like, you know, I just had to think, well, what does that look like in my 15th year of recovery? Because it has changed. It has changed. I think fundamentally, because my understanding of step 6 and 7 has changed. I was a little bit slow off the mark with these two steps. They didn't make a lot of sense to me. I needed to be able to see the immediate practicality of a step, to kind of feel confident with it, to give it really my full attention. So 4 and 5 had my attention. I could see step 9 scared the crap out of me, but it had my attention. I could understand the simple logic of what was going on with those. And 6 and 7, to be honest, they just felt quite nebulous, a little bit like, oh, this is one of these kind of like, it's sort of table dressing, you know what I mean, that we just sort of, we talk about and then we sort of move on. And the truth is, you know, today, it's like, I think there was a turnkey moment for me, especially with step 7, where in the 12 and 12, it talks about self-centered fear being the chief activator of our defects. And for me, that was the aha moment. That was the kind of bit of logic that my brain snagged on. And I was like, ah. And that today, when I think about how do I practice 6 and 7 today, well, it's that. Because what happened through working the steps and the longer I'm around, the more I've realised is, you know, I am not defective. I'm scared. And always was. And the fact is that, you know, that my defects are a symptom. Just like my drinking was a symptom. My defects are a symptom of my fear. And to be honest with you today, I couldn't care less about my defects. I don't care which ones I have. To be honest with you, I have every one. Name one, I absolutely have it. I'm absolutely capable of it. Because I don't see them as permanent residences. Do you know what I mean? What I understand is they're a toolbox. They're a toolkit that I, over time, have accrued and I have used. They are behaviours, they are attitudes, they are things I've done to try and protect myself. You know, and so when I'm in fear, I tend to behave in a defective way. So for me, that started to really help me understand, you know, that there was a practical nature to this, and it could help me. You know, in terms of how I practice it today, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I was saying to someone before the meeting here, I sponsor people. I sponsor a lot of people. I have sponsored a lot of people, and I've never, me personally, I've never been very successful in kind of bringing step 11 alive for someone. Sort of being able to fillet it from the steps 4 to 9 kind of mechanic, which to my mind, steps 4 to 9 is the central mechanic of recovery. It's where change takes place. It's where I was changed. And I think that I often, when I abstract 6 and 7 out and try and explain it to people, I think for me the power's lost. Do you know what I mean? I've always found it difficult to talk about the steps within 4 to 9 in isolation from the steps that come before it. Do you know what I mean? Because the simple fact is, it's like I found out, okay, I'm afraid. Right, so fear is the chief activator of my defects. Well, where did I find out I was afraid? You know, but in steps 4 and 5. But most importantly, in the fear inventory. You know, the fear inventory, which I must have written 3 fear inventories and skipped through them before I understood the importance of them, the relevance of them. You know, I was always obsessed with like writing inventory, gaining insight into me and having material to share in meetings about me. But the fact is, you know, steps 4 and steps 5 to some degree reveal to me where I'm wrong. Do you know what I mean? They don't fix me. They don't change me. You know, I got awareness from them. And then the other thing I get is, but then I was like, okay, so I behaved defectively. Here's the effects of my defective behaviour in the world. But it's like, why? If they're a symptom, what is it? And it's like, it's that fear inventory. And when I looked at that fear inventory, which to be honest with you, hasn't really evolved, many of the things are still there, do you know what I mean? But you know, that fundamental idea that I am not enough, and I'm not going to be okay, and it's not going to work out for me. You know, and when you go through life with that baked into your marrow, you are capable of some pretty weird behaviour. Do you know what I mean? The aggregate of that effect, you know, will start to show in your life, you know. And so for me, to understand 6 and 7, the importance of it, I need to understand that, the fear inventory, you know. I look at the fear inventory, I understand why, okay, these are why I behave in these ways, because I genuinely believe if I don't behave in these ways, I won't be okay. I mean, so first, I think for me, how I practice it today is it's very important, I really don't subscribe to the permanently broken model of alcoholism. I cannot have it. Do you know what I mean? It's like I've had an experience here, new attitudes, govern my life today, and new beliefs. But I still have to watch for fear. And so I was thinking, God, how do I practice 6 and 7 honestly? Because if I'm being honest, I can't sit here and say, I worked to step 7 on that last week. Yeah, you know what I mean? I'm like, haven't done that in a decade, if I'm honest. But I do step 10 a lot. And I think what I take, the understanding I get from 6 and 7, the fact that I want to say, okay, God, take this. I acknowledge it's me. Step 4, it's not happening to me, it's happening because of me. And with that awakening, I'm like, I definitely want rid of this shit. I don't want it. And over time, working with that knowledge, I've been able to take actions in this world, actions that I didn't believe in, actions that I was scared of, that begin to precipitate new experiences for me, which have proven many of those fearful narratives wrong. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I have to say that my experience of the 12 steps today is deeply, deeply practical. I have an aggressively non-spooky take on AA these days. And it's with the practical action that my life has changed. And I spent a lot of time collecting defects, naming defects, wanting to tell everyone about my defects. None of it changed me. It's like, it was the practical actions that came. And step 10 today, I realized when I was thinking about it, is where 6 and 7 play out in my life on a regular basis. Because what I do, when I'm wrong, promptly admitted it. One of the things I got from 6 and 7 and from 4 and 5 is I always now assume I'm wrong. If I have an overly adrenalized, overwhelming reaction to something in the office, anywhere, I'm like, this isn't real. Because that fucker has got the same news, and he's not freaking out, and he's not freaking out, so I know, and it's the thing in step 10. Sorry, 'cause I know this is 6 and 7, so I'm going off piste, but live with it. Do you know what I mean? It's a spiritual axiom that when I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. That is the absolute fact. That's the keystone of this man's recovery. There's something wrong with me. And when I come from that place, I can start watching for fear. When I get that overly adrenalized thing, it's like, okay, because that fear is what's about to start, is going to kick my defects into action. I'm about to behave like a bellend. I'm about to bring about my own sort of demise in this moment. And it's practicing that. That's how I practice 6 and 7 today. When we're wrong, promptly admitted it. And what I love about that today, I don't have to sort of be in a meeting and be like, I was wrong, and I'm promptly admit. It literally means in the moment, I can recognize fear. I can recognize, that the defects are coming up, and I can course correct in that moment. Because the fact is, I don't want to be doing 4 to 9 again and again and again. I don't want to be causing so much wreckage in my life anymore that I'm constantly having to inventory it. And so fear inventories, aka, or a step 10 inventory, whatever you want to call it, is the thing I use today to practice the principles that are in 6 and 7. It's like, I start from the fact that I'm wrong, I look at it, and I'm willing to be, and the thing that I got from 6 and 7, the thing that I realized when I went in there, it's like, oh God, it's me. It is me, it's not them. That realization, and then offering it up, that's the thing that changes me today. That's the thing. The one thing I have today, as a result of practicing 6 and 7 in my roundabout way, is I have a life that is 100% my fault. It is 100%. There is nothing in my life today that I can put on anyone else. My life, the one thing AA has deprived me of is excuses. I no longer have an excuse. The state of my life today is based on my behaviour yesterday. There's no childhood trauma. There's nothing that triggers me. I don't have the excuse to be like, oh, this, and now I behave like that. No. Do you know what I mean? I have a 6 and 7. I take inventory. I recognise the fear and it's coming up, and I can course correct. And as a result, I have an amazing life. So I hope that made sense. I hope that involves some 6 and 7, because that's the best I got.
Okay. Yeah, take it away, Cara. Thank you so much, Dan.
Hi, I'm Cara, recovering alcoholic.
Hi, Cara.
Thank you for asking me, Vito. I don't think he's here. 6 and 7. So, the first time I did 6 and 7, I kind of misread the literature, I think. I had like this, awakening in step 1 when we spoke about the mental obsession, that like without God, I can't prevent the mental obsession. So, you know, I can stop drinking, but the thought will eventually come that it's okay to drink, and that God can protect me from that lie. And then step 3, where it says we stood at the turning point, and I knew at that, like, I was surrendering myself to, like, my future being anything that was within God's will. And then in step 6 and 7, I felt like, oh, I just need to be willing, and then I can kind of go about my business, and he's just going to lift these defects. And actually what did happen was I surrendered the things that were like morally wrong. So like one example would be like dishonesty. And I remember the shift really clearly, because it wasn't really about lying to people, but the denial within myself lifted. And, you know, where I thought I could, you know, be part of AA and stay sober and just do what I've got to do, like the real truth about, like, I had to do what everyone else was going to do to stay sober, you know, that's when I really knew what it meant to be part of a fellowship, you know, and give service. Like, do I have the time to give service? I couldn't bullshit any of these things anymore. So with that denial lifting and being honest with myself, then like came huge responsibility. So I was like, wow, this is like where the heavy lifting really starts, because I really have to do some work now. And, you know, as the years have gone on, you know, and actually rereading it in the 12 and 12 yesterday, you know, for me that willingness is action, and I'm prone to inaction, because, you know, if I and it's not like because I'm lazy by any means, but I don't want to make a mistake, I don't want to fail. So if I just don't do anything, then I don't put myself in any like of that danger. But what willingness looks like is actually taking action, and God there, and the perfectionism is being willing to try and fail anyway. And I was thinking it in terms of like making a recipe. I'm terrible at cooking. Even if I follow the instructions, like, and measurements and things like that, it usually turns out terribly. But at least I'm trying, and I'm like following it clearly, you know. And actually, like another analogy for me was, you know, when I decided I've got an 18-month-old to have a baby, you know, like I really understood, like, I can't force this, you know, I can't actually make this happen. I can create the conditions for this to happen, but it could take a month, it could take 6 months, it could take years, you know. So how was I going to live my life in that time while, you know, I was open to this thing happening? You know, and essentially that's how I lived my life with the character defects, you know, like I prepare, you know, the environment, my attitude, my thinking towards it. And I did one yesterday, so it's really fresh in my mind. I did a recent one. So one of my obsessions is compulsive browsing. Love browsing on the internet, Amazon, shopping, information. And it doesn't even need to be anything fancy. I had like this adrenaline rush looking for like mosquito spray for like our holiday, you know? And so, and I kept on like being really honest with people about it and trying to get help to stop browsing. I was like, I need to stop browsing, because I did find it objectionable. I could spend hours. I remember one Christmas I was like, Chinese pajamas for adults. You know, what am I thinking that these Chinese pajamas for adults are going to do? Like, am I picturing myself on Instagram? Probably. Even though like I'm not really active on social. And so anyway, I kept trying to stop it, but actually what happened was I had to look, so that's the behavior, but actually what's the character defect, you know? And for me, if I looked at it practically yesterday, it was lack of responsibility, so irresponsibility, and being undisciplined as well. So these are the things that I took to God, you know, and how has it diminished my life? Wasted time, I'm exhausted, I feel a fraud in recovery because this ain't good. So I'm disconnected from people. You know, I'm making silly demands of myself. And also, like, occasionally I do spend, you know, on these things. So I'm putting my family in financial insecurity. So there's, like, lots of consequences. And that's why I love 6 and 7, because I start to see the payoff of, like, my behaviors and where it could essentially lead to. And then I ask myself, you know, whether I want to be free from that. And I think all character defects are essentially just distractions. Distractions, you know, I have a very busy mind, I like being distracted, you know, and it's quite hard to stop and pause, you know, and I have these skills and talents, and we all do, and I don't mean that in, like, any kind of career sense, in whatever it may mean, and the character defects, all they do is kind of like hide all the kind of like the treasure underneath, you know. And so by being free from it, you know, like, I get to live my true self, you know, and that's where step 7 is, you know, the humility of taking really tiny actions every day, or, like, say with savings, you know, believing that, like, I can save a tiny bit of money and it's going to mean something, you know. I can take a small action towards something, you know. For me, that's the humility of step 7. And when I became really willing to say, right, actually, I find this objectionable, I want this to change, then, you know, within a month, I found someone to meet every week to go through, like, my spending with, you know, she does the same. There was a work incentive to, like, save in an investment, did that. The other online platform from work where it had, like, lessons on compulsive shopping and meditations and all sorts. So, like, help comes from each area, you know. I have to show up for this stuff, and I really just felt like, actually, I know I was kind of that entirely ready because all the help showed up. And what I was saying to my friend yesterday, who I do she's in recovery as well, my spending with, was, like, I didn't realize, because I think I can't remember what they call it in 12 and 12, but it's like, because they don't feel important, it's just compulsive browsing. It's not really, like, affecting my life. But actually, I really saw how it affected my life. And then now, the reverse in 1 month, seeing how the recovery from that character defect has affected all of my life. You know, the time I have, the sense of security. So, you know, that the character defects were undisciplined and irresponsible. I had to be willing to become responsible and disciplined. And yeah, it starts, doesn't it, where it says it separates the men from the boys. And, like, step 7 helped me to grow up, essentially. You know, I became an adult reluctantly. And, like, this browsing thing, you know, I mean, I was, like, in the shop from a young age, like, spending on sweets and perfume and magazines and stuff. You know, it was, like, time to give it up. And I just feel like I've entered into a new chapters. You know, so, like, the steps continue to kind of, like, essentially help me grow up. Yeah, I can really experience that change in my life today, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Cara. Tim?
Is that the recording?
Oh, thank you. Perfect.
Thanks. Tim, our colleague.
Hi, Tim.
So glad to be here. So I got sober in 1993, so I've been at this for 28, 29 years now. and I'm still sober, so something has worked. There isn't, I don't think, a right way or a wrong way to do anything in AA. There's I can tell you what I've done, and I can tell you what results I get. And what I do is everyone does it slightly differently, or sometimes radically differently. That's fine. So you just get to pick the way you want to do it. There are certain principles, though. One of them is if you can't reconcile anything I say to what's in the big book, then feel very free to ignore it. 6 and 7. I'm going to put this in some context. On page 53, it says, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? I drank an awful lot, and I do very dangerous, antisocial and unpleasant things when I'm drinking. When I start drinking, I might not stop for years. So not having the first drink is very important. It's not just, oh, I might have a terrible blowout this evening. You might not see me until 2050 if I drank today. So I've got to be very careful about the first drink. However, I've got a mind, part of which is programmed to want the first drink, regardless of whether or not I want to have the first drink. It wants to have the first drink. So I've got to be not in charge, not in ultimate charge. I have delegated responsibility and authority in my life from the higher power. But it's not ultimate responsibility and authority. The ultimate responsibility and authority lies with the higher power. When I've got that relationship right, I'm safe. And it's a bit like having a job in a shop where you're the manager of a shop and the owner of the shop lives in Corfu or whatever. So you have to, he's not actually there, you have to manage the shop. But if you get it too wrong, you're going to get sacked. If I go too far off-piste, in other words, if I deviate too far from fulfilling my role that the higher power would have me fulfill, the deal is going to be off. And that's just rules of the house. It's not vindictive on the part of the higher power. It's me separating myself from the higher power by doing what lawyers would call, if you work for a company and you act without the authority of the company, in law, company law, they refer to it as being on a frolic of your own. If I'm off on a frolic of my own, I'm going to drink. And I'm going to do some other things as well. I'm not going to name those, because this is an AA meeting. But there's a list. So I've got to be kept on track. People keep themselves on track in different ways, and that's well and good. What I've finally come to after all these years is that I need to revisit the basic process of the first 9 steps, and I do it once a quarter. It takes about 2 hours and I am done. But I do it. And funnily enough, it was 1st of March, on the 1st of March, and it was time for me to do my little quarterly catch-up. Where am I? Now, I sponsor a lot of people, so I'm endlessly going through steps 1, 2, and 3. That was pretty straightforward. That didn't take long to review. With the step 4, I don't get bogged down in resentments. I asked my other half once how he deals with people resenting him. He's very senior in his role, so a lot of people are very angry with him. And they say so publicly. And I said, how do you deal with other people being resentful towards you? And he says, well, first of all, I'm embarrassed for them because it's so childish. Secondly, I know. Secondly, it gets worse. They need to get over it because it gets in the way. So my inventory today is not about my resentment. All that resentment stuff in step 4 is stuff to be gotten out of the way so that I can do an inventory of myself. While my finger's pointing at you, quivering with rage, I'm not going to assess myself. Resentment is blinding. So when I do inventory today, I'm aiming for what is the exact nature of my wrongs? What are my character defects? So I've got a list I use, and I go down the list, and if the defect goes ouch, I've got it. And below each defect, I might write an example of how I've acted out on that defect in the last 3 months, and what the corrective measure is. So I ask the higher power to show me, what should my attitude be instead? What should my action be instead? And I went through and shared this with a number of people this week. Again, it takes 15 minutes. Doesn't take long, but it's a 360-degree review. It means you can walk round the entire problem in 10 to 15 minutes, as opposed to being a month of Sundays, which is there's nothing worse than inventory, which actually deepens one's sense of self, because you construct this sort of huge mountain range of problems. As they say in a Pet Shop Boys song, you make such a little go such a very long way. And that's the truth of my inventory. It was a relatively small number of character defects, manifesting in endless variation, but it's the same thing over and over. So I mustn't make a meal out of inventory. On page 263 of the big book, there's a story about a chap who, I think it was Paul S., who founded AA in Chicago. And it talks about how Dr. Bob, one of our co-founders, took him through the formal process of the first few steps over 3 to 4 hours. And he was very impressed at how much of his time Bob gave him. It's very interesting compared to, a lot of sponsees today. If you don't give them 4 hours in one day, they feel very short-changed indeed. And that's just because they want to chat about, their grievances against people. So things have changed a little bit. But the point is, I keep it simple and clear. And I picked there's one person in particular who knows me very well. So we went through and we made a list of what my 12, well, I came up with 10, and what we do is we give him room to add 2. So we came up with what my 12 most significant character defects were, and we discussed them, and we discussed what the opposite would be. Now, the thing is, after all these years, this is not a question of information. I mean, it involves information. I've got to have the information. But it's a question of experience. When this group, the Brick Lane Big Book study started, after about a year, we had a group conscience meeting where we discussed whether or not we were going to change the name of the group. And the idea was to change it from the Brick Lane Big Book study to the Brick Lane Big Book experience. And no one liked this at all. This was a very bad idea. So it didn't happen, which is why it's still called the Brick Lane Big Book study. But I still like this name, experience. I think this is about experience, not analysis. Now, it does require me to analyze my thinking, my beliefs and my behavior, to summarize that very clearly and to talk it through with someone else. But the purpose of that is not greater understanding, it's humility. It's where I say, I'm going to read you what this list was. It's not an attractive list, and it's not lurid either, so you needn't stuff your ears with cheese. So the 12 character defects we came up with, which are not very flattering, fearfulness. So this sort of overreaction to minor setbacks and fussing about them. Brooding. There's nothing like watching the news to start a good round of brooding. Censoriousness, looking for little faults and blowing them out of proportion and moralizing about them. Cruelty. I enjoy seeing other people suffer a little more than I would normally admit to. Now, this sounds like a very unusual character defect, but I'll just ask you, if you've enjoyed watching an episode of Game of Thrones, you'll know exactly what I mean. Materialism. By that, I don't mean the acquisition of stuff. It's having my identity locked in the material world as opposed to seeing myself as spirit. Touchiness. That needs no explanation. There's one where I won't give you the technical term. It is a technical term, but it's basically trying to fit everyone to the way I want things to be done. Arrogance, inflexibility, domination, irascibility, 0 to 60 in a couple of seconds, and callousness. Now, this is not to beat myself up. This is to observe what I get up to in order that I say in step 6 and 7, I do not want to be like that anymore. So we constructed a list. What's the opposite of those? And these are the things that I'm set about trying to foster. Trust, being present. Tradition 10, having no opinion on outside issues. Kindness, spirituality as opposed to materialism. Impersonality, treating everyone the same. Creativity, humility, flexibility, collegiality, patience and empathy. And I deliberately try and foster these. Not because I'm a good person or a nice person, but I know which side of my bread is buttered. That's the deal here, is to try to move away from the defects towards the opposing virtues. Now, I do step 10 as time passes. That's certainly the case. I don't not do it. And I do, or more particularly, I do a step 11 review from page 86. Not a lot comes up on it. What I find, though, is that it's rather like the cooker at home. Things end up behind the cooker. You don't know how the Brussels sprout got there, but get there it does. And the kitchen starts to smell and you don't know why. And it's not because you're not cleaning it daily. For some reason, not everyone needs to do this. This is why I need to have this 360-degree review on a regular basis. Because even if I am catching everything, somehow residue builds up and I start to overlook and excuse my own, for example, callousness. And I start to normalize it. I treat it, well, it's just my personality, it's just who I am. And it's not. It's who I've been performing. So the point of this is through my human interaction with the person that I do this process with, step 5, which involves discussion of 6 and 7, it humanizes me again, because it brings everything out into the open that I don't want to come out into the open. And I'm able to read you that list. There's nothing hiding beyond that. That's it. And they're not very pleasant, but that's all it is. It's just a list. No different than many other people's. And I don't understand exactly how. I know a little bit about how. But what I can report is the experience of this enables change to take place, which couldn't take place otherwise. There's something about this revisiting the process formally, albeit in a morning, which enables shifts to happen. I can feel myself over the last 2 weeks, priorities in my life changing without me having to change them. It becomes automatic. So I don't have to get rid of any of my character defects myself. I have to engage in this process. And then once I've taken step 6 and 7, then 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12 remove the defects for me. But I can't do it through muscle. I do it by simply following, doing what it says, the black bits of the book, black bits of the page. Just do those, see what happens. It shouldn't work, but it does. There we go, even after all this time. So that's enough from me. Thanks, Indira.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Tim. Lovely.